most people don't remember, but in 2007, Hurricane Erica decided to actually landfilled itself right over the state of Oklahoma, and actually its eye was directly over my nation. And we had quite a bit of flooding, so that was my introduction to FEMA. So the day I became an environmental director, I became an emergency manager too. And we are about boots on ground. So these other stories you're talking about are different case studies. I'm actually the case study itself. So I started a project back with about 2009. Quick story, really quick, is that I got a call from a few tribal members and a few landowners around me. Landowners were actually white ranchers, and we don't try to discriminate because in emergency management, EPA, we don't really see tribes or groups, we just see people. And you really have to look at people as where they live in their communities and their neighborhoods. So every community has its very own story to tell. So there's a lot of story for journalists to come out and talk to. And my story is I was called to go to Redland College to talk to the Oklahoma Water Resource Board, which I will not tell you they're evil, even though I think so. But actually, I have actually grown to know a few of them, so some of them are actually human. Obviously, I always talk only to humans. And anyway, back to the story. I came to Redland College, and they were talking about how the neighboring county, Grady County, was going to come into Caddo County, that's where I live, and was going to take drill some industrial bore hose and channel out the water into Grady County, right next door, and sell it to all these major cities who need water. Well, the landowners around there, now they live in, I'm just going to go through this. I brought you guys a bunch of my bulletins the first 4 years of my study, and feel free to take them. I wish I had enough for everybody, but it'll tell you the science, because I'm not going to blind you with science today, because, well, it even blinds me, and I only have 10 minutes. So I'm going to go, I'm doing a hydrological study. This is my aquifer. This is where I live, and Caddo Nation is literally right here, right smack in the middle of some of the best pristine water in the state of Oklahoma. And every single person and his brother wants it. So in about 2009, I came up with against the Grady County next door to me. This is Caddo County, and Grady is right next door, which I actually have parts of as well. And they said they didn't know why we were complaining so much because they've been taking our water for years. And one of the things I had to prove to the Oklahoma Water Resource Board is that depletion, new wells, new rural communities coming in on our water, we had to prove depletion. Well, the worst thing you want to do is talk to a science geek like me and say, prove something. So I did. Tune about over $1 million now and over 6 partnerships. So this is my aquifer. The area where we're drilling was over here in this little finger, and the ranchers were already getting gyp water. They had to keep drilling new water, new water, new water. The worst thing is that Grady County was going to come in, take the water, and turn around and sell it back to the people they took it from. And so there was a lot of people. So I went in there and I started asking questions, and I got a call from my mother, like, when are you coming home for dinner? I don't know. And while I was gone, my assistant says, did you know when you left, everybody said, who is she? Who is that person? And so I said, well, that's the Caddo Nation. And they were like, oh my God, the Caddo Nation has come to save us. And I thought, oh God, this is going to be the first time in history that a bunch of white people wanted the Indians to come in. So anyway, about a couple of years later, I caused Grady County about 3 years of hiccups because they didn't do due process with me. I held up on their USDA grant for over 3 years. But personally, I don't really think that people should hoard resources. It's about drinking water. If people need water to drink, then people should be given water to drink. So my question for this hydrological study became, how much money and how much time does it take, and how much water is there? How often do you see people who take resources like the air, the soil, the water, and think that it's, I don't know, unlimited? It's not unlimited, because a bunch of water becomes sequestered into areas that are no longer potable, meaning drinkable. If you take your drinkable water and you reprocess it into a process that makes it undrinkable, then you're starting to take away from a natural process. What are you going to do? We build ways to desalinize. We build ways to fix our water. But you know what? Mother Nature does that all for us. and it's actually learning to live with those systems. And maybe from a tribal perspective, that's what we look at. So anyway, I started doing that research. This here is the culmination of 4 years of study. We were into the next 2 years of study. Most people, as they were talking about, were riparian or river assets. I'm looking at groundwater. So right now I am running like 5 of these little dots here. I have 5 stations throughout just one county of Oklahoma, which actually monitors water quality 24/7 with satellite upfeed. It's on the USGS site, so anytime you can see how much water is being pulled and how long it takes to refresh back. And so I can tell you when Farmer John decides to irrigate his fields, and I can tell you how long it took the water to come back. And I'm like one of the only people who's actually doing water quantity monitoring and not just water quality. So, and as you'll see, water is a resource that people fight over. You guys remember the old Westerns, John Wayne? It's all about rangeland. It was all about water resources. And to this day, it still is. And as a tribal member, before we eat, we drink water. A little cup of water, it's our prayer to God to thank for the water that rains. And so, as I'm saying, I'm just a separate story. This is one of my monitoring wells. This is what it looks like. I did an contiguous research and a gap analysis, and over 50 years my aquifer had only moved about ½ centimeter. I luckily put these in 2010 and caught the drought 1 year before it began. So I actually have water information and now drought information. And I was actually very lucky to pick it up, so we are still actually holding these actual monitoring wells now throughout the drought. The one thing that's really the most important thing that we discovered, by the way, these are all my spring heads, and I did a lot of work. So when you talk boots on ground, I'm boots on ground. But there's almost not a single water system that I haven't fallen into in the state of Oklahoma, or slid down into, or got trapped in. I actually carry usually a receiver to call, help, where are you? I don't know, let me GPS myself. So anyway, I have literally traversed all through Caddo County. And the really important thing about Caddo County, and here's how I picked my wells. I used wells that were already in existence with like irrigation wells. So I have 5 set up throughout the county. Water Resource Board has now since come back and they've added a couple more. But the really important thing is that there's very little interaction that's known between groundwater and surface water. If you go through EPA, most of the stuff is water quality, or it's all about surface water, the rivers that flow, where the water comes from. But there is a true interaction. At the very top, this is the beginning of my study, during a flood year, you could see that my aquifer level was all my streams were actually feeding into the aquifer. They were actually spring fed. All the rivers were being spring fed from my aquifer. And as you see the drought, as it goes down, my aquifer goes down, there's a reverse. All of a sudden, the streams are now no longer being fed by the aquifer, but the streams are actually feeding into the aquifer. Well, this is really, really important because the one thing I've noticed that I've lost a lot of spring heads. And I actually did GPS locating of all my spring heads. And I modeled when I could actually predict during a drought which ones of my creeks would dry up first based on their elevations. So right now we're in a critical, we have over, I told you that in the first 50 years we only had ½ centimeter loss. In the last 3 years we've had 10 centimeters lost. And the really important thing about my aquifer is that it's not recovering anymore. And so when you talk about these underground rivers that flow, people always think of it as a river. It's not really that, but anyway, when you think about these resources underneath your feet, and people who they drill their ranchers, and so we're looking at these ranches going under. They're like generational ranches. They've been in existence for over 100 years or since the land run. And they're looking at unable to actually water their cattle anymore, let alone feed them hay or build the hay that does that. So every time, like I say as a journalist, when you're talking about stories or case studies, every case study is actually somebody's story. And that's what this is. This is just a story with a bunch of science thrown in to confuse you. And what it comes down to, though, is that we're looking at a groundwater quality assessment, our hydrological framework. What I'm doing is I'm actually modeling my entire reservoir of water. And I'm just going to flip through this stuff so you guys don't have to read it off. But there's Oklahoma, there's my counties, and there's my aquifer. And when I look at it right now is, these are the water uses that I pull from my aquifer. Mostly farming and irrigation. There's a huge amount of agriculture, but there's oil and gas. I have a tremendous amount of oil and gas wells. Over last count, I had 7,000, last month I had over 7,000 open wells just for oil industry. And so these are not just infusion wells, these are fracking wells. So another thing that I've been actually also monitoring is my earthquakes due to fracking wells. And you guys know that's very big in the news right now, and they're actually coming to the point where they're trying to shut down a lot of the fracking that's going on in the state of Oklahoma. We just hit the momentous of actually having more earthquakes in the city of San Francisco. So that's a lot of fun for Oklahoma. So I expect it to be a disaster film, like in 3 years from now, where the entire state of Oklahoma breaks in half or something. But anyway, potential conservation practices. These are the things that I'm actually investigating right now on how to bring the water back into the system. We're in a drought, but you guys want to know that last week we actually had a few tornadoes, just a couple, that decided to only move about 5 miles per hour. So they jumped about, my rain gauge said about 18 inches in an hour. The last time I got 18 inches in an hour was when Hurricane Erica decided to drop everything on top of me. So last week I had the fun of actually pulling people out of broken down roads, or let's just say roads that no longer exist. So when you're looking at, we always talk about stories about when do people decide to do something? When do they decide to investigate something? How does a case study begin? A case study begins as a story. And from that story, you start asking questions. How much water is there? How are we going to conserve this water? How many rural water districts can come in and pull my water before there's no water left for the people who actually live there? These are really important questions to ask. And then also the next question is, okay, if our water becomes limited due to drought, because we're in a 10-year drought, although I did get to hear on my way here from Oklahoma that they said because of all the water we got last week that we're no longer in a drought. Yeah, right. So anyway, I start looking at grassways or green spaces. I'm looking at watershed, recovery. I'm also looking at rain gardens, and my newest thing is actually rain collectors to actually irrigate fields. Using rain collectors overnight that collect the moisture and then funnel it back in and irrigate my fields. So right now my fields look kind of dusty because it's not working really well, but I'm still working on it. And so anyway, overall benefits to Cattle Nation is this entire project is going to create a modeling of my aquifer, where I can come in and say, if so-and-so pulls this much out, so much cubic feet or so many million gallons of water per day, what will it do to my aquifer? And my modeling through science is going to be able to tell you how far the aquifer is going to come down, if it's going to be able to refresh. We're also adding climatic information in there as well to say what happens if there's a dry season or a wet season. You always talk about some areas have too much water, other areas have too little. Well, in any one given day, I have both. This is one day in my life. There's a flooded out road. That used to be a creek, now it's a river. That is a tornado that was the result of that creek. And I also had a wildland fire at the same time. So anytime in one day I could have 5 scenarios going on, whether it's a drought, I have a drought, a flood. I actually had an ice storm, a tornado, and a flooding event all at the same time, all in one day. So as an emergency manager, any story could be a different story for me. And I invite you to look through the science part of my study. I'm not going to bore you with the science because there's just only so much I can do to you in 10 minutes. How am I doing for time?
You're just right.
I'm perfect. Okay. So anyway, my name is Polly Edwards. I'm with the tribal nation of Caddo, Chickasaw, and German. And that is my email address, and that is my study over there. Feel free to read through it. But I think the giveaway or the takeaway message for you is that at the grounds level, boots on ground, every story starts at a small point, and it can escalate into a very big study. And I think what you want to do is go back to where the grassroots began. Because we always look at traditional knowledge. We ask the people, tell me the story of the weather. If you want to come to Oklahoma, we will talk to you about weather, because that is all we have is weather. And that's the only thing anybody ever wants to talk about anyway. So, thank you.